5 years married, and there we were, sitting across from each other at some cozy little restaurant for our anniversary, supposed to be celebrating. I could still remember when we first met. It was at this university networking event. Cassandra stood out from everyone else, talking with that mix of confidence and ambition that immediately got my attention. She wasn't just pretty, no. She had a way with words, knew exactly what she wanted, which back then was a career in business. I felt proud, honestly. Felt like I'd found someone who had her sights set on something real, not just the usual college daydreams. That night, as we were reminiscing, it hit me that something had changed. She was there across from me, looking beautiful as always, talking about those early days, but I could tell she was somewhere else. I remember her laughing, trying to pull me into some old story, but it felt hollow. I could see it in her eyes. It wasn't something I could put my finger on right then, but there was a distance between us I couldn't ignore. The days rolled on after that dinner. I got busy with work, diving into the usual projects and the occasional banter with my coworkers about weekend plans, making jokes about work-life balance. It was routine stuff. Cassandra started coming home late more often. She said it was work, a new project, or some big client they were chasing. I didn't mind at first. I knew she was ambitious, dedicated. But then it became every night. And whenever she came back, she seemed different, always talking about her boss, Dante. You could hear the excitement in her voice. Too much excitement. She'd say things like, Dante's got this amazing vision, or Dante really knows how to get things done. The way she talked about him, man, you'd think he was some kind of saint. I try not to read too much into it. We'd been married long enough that I didn't want to start doubting her, just because she had a new boss. But it started grating on me. I'd be sitting there, waiting for her to come home, expecting some regular conversation about our day, and she'd start talking about him again, her eyes lighting up. I could feel something twisting inside me, this little nagging feeling that I kept trying to brush off. It's just work, I'd tell myself. Don't be that guy, Gree. And then it wasn't just the late nights. Cassandra's behavior started changing. She'd plan out every detail of her days, almost down to the minute. This was new. Cassandra's organized, but she never used to be like that. I try to make plans with her, ask if she wanted to do something spontaneous, just go out or maybe have a quiet weekend at home. But she'd always have some excuse. Oh, I have a big presentation coming up, or I promised Dante I'd help out with this project. It was always something, always about work. She was creating this buffer, like there was no room for me anymore in her world. Then there was her phone. It used to be out, just lying on the table when we were around each other, but now it was constantly on silent, and she'd keep it close to her. She'd respond to texts in another room, or if I happened to walk in, she'd quickly put it away, look up with that nothing-to-see-here smile. The worst part was whenever I tried to bring it up, she'd make me feel like I was paranoid. It's just work stuff, Gree, she'd say, like it was nothing, like I didn't have any reason to be worried. But that smile, it felt more like a wall than reassurance. And that knot in my stomach only grew tighter. I'll never forget one particular night. We were having dinner, trying to just sit and talk like normal, and she brought up Dante again. But this time, it was different. She went on about how impressive he was, how driven and focused he seemed, how he'd accomplished so much in such a short time. The admiration in her voice was painfully obvious. I was sitting there, nodding along, trying not to let on that I was feeling this sick jealousy. But the way she talked about him, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just background noise now, something she'd left behind without even noticing. After dinner, I tried to break through to her, just try to get her to open up a bit. I asked her how things were really going, asked if she was feeling stressed or maybe overwhelmed with all this work. She just looked at me and laughed a little, like I was overreacting. I've got it all under control, Gree, she said, this look of confidence, almost arrogance. She didn't need me to comfort her, didn't need me to ask questions. She had her own world, and I wasn't a part of it anymore. That's how it felt anyway, like I was standing on the other side of some invisible wall she'd built around herself. That night, I lay there, staring at the ceiling while she was asleep beside me. I couldn't close my eyes, couldn't shake this feeling that I was losing her. It's one thing when two people just drift apart slowly, naturally, but this felt like something was pulling her away, something I couldn't see or fight. And I hated it, hated that I was just lying there, feeling helpless. The worst part was every time I tried to address it, to get her to talk, she'd just brush me off. And I didn't want to push too hard, didn't want to come off as insecure or needy. But it wasn't in my head. I knew something was wrong, knew she was slipping away from me, and all I could do was sit there, drowning in my own doubts and insecurities. I tried to convince myself it was all just work stress, that she'd come back to me eventually. But each day, it felt like she was slipping further and further away, like I was holding on to something that didn't even exist anymore. And honestly, I was afraid to confront it, afraid of what I'd find if I did. So I kept quiet, hoping, waiting. But deep down, I think I already knew I was losing her. Looking back, I don't know if I should have said something right from the start. Maybe if I just asked her outright. Maybe if I hadn't let the doubts gnaw at me in silence. But I couldn't shake that feeling, that knot in my stomach getting tighter every day. And then things started happening that I couldn't just brush off as paranoia. It was a regular weeknight. We decided to actually have dinner together, something that seemed harder to come by these days with her work schedule. We were halfway through the meal when her phone buzzed. Nothing unusual, except this time, she grabbed it so fast, I barely even registered the sound. She glanced at the screen, and I saw this flicker of nervousness cross her face. I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, "Who's calling you at this hour?" She hesitated, didn't answer right away, and that alone set off alarm bells. She cleared her throat, plastered on a tight smile, and said, "It's just work, Gree. A last-minute question about a project." She lifted her phone, but I could see her hands shake a little. Her voice was off, not steady. But before I could ask anything else, she got up, saying she'd take it outside, so it wouldn't interrupt our dinner. "It'll only be a minute," she said, and disappeared down the hallway. She was gone for longer than a minute. I sat there, alone at the table, listening to the silence of the house. My food went cold, but I didn't even notice. My mind was running in 1,000 different directions, none of them good. When she finally came back, she looked almost guilty. I wanted to ask her, to push for the truth, but then she sat down and gave me this look like daring me to bring it up. So, I let it go, even though I knew something wasn't right. Over the next few days, those calls kept happening. Strange, random calls during dinner, at night when we were supposed to be winding down. And every single time, she'd answer with that same nervous edge, tell me it was just work. But there was this crack in her voice that hadn't been there before. And I wasn't stupid. I knew there was something she wasn't telling me. I couldn't let it go anymore. So, I decided to do a little digging. I didn't want to become that paranoid husband, but I had to know. I asked a few friends, just casually, I wanted to keep it subtle. One of our mutual friends mentioned she'd been spending a lot of time with Dante outside of regular work hours. Apparently, they'd even gone out for drinks with a few colleagues. "She's probably just networking," my friend said, brushing it off. But I couldn't shake the thought. I didn't know Dante, but I was getting to know enough about him to make me wary. That's when I knew I needed help. I couldn't just sit around, stewing in my own suspicions. So, I reached out to Oscar. We go way back. He's an old buddy and a private investigator. I figured if anyone could give me clarity, it'd be him. When I told him what was going on, he didn't look surprised. He just nodded, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Gree, let's get you some answers." We talked it over, and he suggested we start with a few simple checks, a little surveillance, just to make sure I wasn't jumping to conclusions. The next couple of days, I was on edge, waiting for Oscar's updates. Meanwhile, at home, I was trying to act normal, but every time I looked at Cassandra, I felt this resentment creeping in. She was my wife, for God's sake. I shouldn't have had to doubt her like this. But she wasn't making it any easier. I'd catch her on her phone, messaging someone, and as soon as I walked in, she'd close it, almost like she was hiding something. Every single time. I tried to convince myself it was all just work-related, just her way of staying connected to the office. But the more I tried to believe that, the more hollow it felt. One evening, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, completely engrossed in her phone. She didn't even look up when I walked in. I cleared my throat, and she glanced up, startled. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "Who are you texting so late?" She shrugged, put her phone down a little too quickly. "It's just the office, Gree. You don't need to worry." But her eyes wouldn't meet mine. She was lying, and we both knew it. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, but I swallowed it, played along like the clueless husband she probably thought I was. Then came the final straw. She came home one night, all excited, talking about an important conference she'd been invited to. Said it was a big opportunity that Dante had recommended her personally. My gut reaction was to be happy for her, to support her career. But something didn't sit right. She barely gave me any details, just brushed it off like it was nothing worth discussing. When I asked for specifics, she got defensive, said it was last minute, and she didn't have all the information yet. She kept it vague, evasive, like she didn't want me knowing too much. That night, I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, realizing I couldn't just let this go anymore. I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. She was hiding something, and I was going to uncover it, even if it shattered everything we'd built. The day I finally learned the truth about Cassandra was one of those days that start out feeling too quiet, almost like the world knows something you don't. Oscar and I had been planning it for a while, and he'd finally set up a tracker on her phone. I hated that it had come to this, hated that I was the kind of husband who needed a tracker to know what his wife was up to. But there I was, checking my phone every hour, each buzz sending my nerves on edge. The conference weekend came. She packed a suitcase, threw in a few dresses, and left with barely a goodbye, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in a long time. She assured me she'd call when she arrived. "It's just work, Gree," she said, smiling like she hadn't a care in the world. But I knew better. My mind was a mess, a constant tug-of-war between fear and denial. But the knot in my stomach had been there for so long, it almost felt like a part of me now. As the hours ticked by, I tried to keep myself busy, but my thoughts were glued to that tracker, waiting for it to show me something, anything that could give me answers. I could barely eat or sleep, and every time I thought about her and Dante, my heart felt like it was tearing apart. Late into the first night, I got the notification I'd been dreading. The tracker pinged her location, a hotel on the other side of town. Not a conference center, not an office building, a damn hotel. I felt my chest constrict, this raw, sickening realization washing over me. It was like every doubt, every gut feeling had been leading to this. I sank down into a chair, staring at the screen, trying to wrap my head around it. She was supposed to be at a work event, but she was there with him. It was all so painfully clear now. The next morning, Oscar called. He'd seen the location, too, and I barely had words to explain how I felt. "I can't believe this is happening," I mumbled, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't sugarcoat it. "Gree, you needed to know. Now we need to think about what comes next." Oscar suggested following them next time, gathering something undeniable. But I'd already seen enough. I didn't need more evidence. I needed to confront her. I couldn't keep living like this, pretending everything was fine. She came home 2 days later, acting like nothing had happened. I watched her unpack her suitcase, laughing as she told me about her conference. She even brought back a cheap souvenir, like I was some kind of fool who'd buy her whole story. I could feel my anger bubbling up, but I didn't want to explode. Not yet. I needed answers, needed to hear her try and lie her way out of this one more time. So I asked, keeping my voice steady, "Did you have a good time?" She looked at me a little too quickly, and I saw a flicker of something, guilt maybe, but she plastered on that fake smile again and said, "Of course." It was all work, a bit exhausting actually. She even yawned, like she'd been running herself ragged on my behalf. I didn't want to accuse her outright. I wanted to give her one last chance to come clean. I nodded, looked her right in the eyes, and asked, "Was everything just work, Cassandra? Anything else you want to tell me?" She paused, just for a split second, then laughed it off. "Gree, you're being silly. It was a conference. You're really overthinking this." She was lying straight to my face, and I couldn't take it anymore. She brushed past me, saying she needed to rest, leaving me standing there, a storm of emotions boiling inside me. Later that night, when she'd gone to bed, I finally did what I never thought I'd do. I unlocked her phone. She was asleep, breathing peacefully like she hadn't a care in the world. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't stop myself. I went through her messages, scrolling until I found his name. And there they were, messages from Dante. They weren't just friendly exchanges or work updates. These were the kind of messages you don't send your boss unless there's something else going on. There were late-night confessions about how much they enjoyed their time together, how he couldn't wait to see her again. Some were more explicit, intimate in ways I'd rather not even remember. Words I'd never heard from her, sentiments she'd stopped sharing with me long ago. I felt this crushing weight on my chest, like I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every message was a knife twisting deeper into my gut, confirming what I'd been dreading all along. I just sat there in the dark, feeling my world fall apart. Everything I thought we had, every memory, every promise, it was all shattered in front of me. She'd chosen him over me, lied to my face, and gone behind my back like I was nothing to her. And as much as I wanted to scream, to break something, I just felt empty, hollow, like she'd taken everything out of me and left nothing behind. The next day, I went to see Oscar. I told him everything, showed him the messages. I didn't have to say much. He could see the look on my face. "Gree," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "I know this hurts, but we're going to get through this. You're not alone." He suggested we track them down next time, follow them, gather undeniable evidence in case this thing blew up. But honestly, I didn't even care about that anymore. I just wanted to confront her, make her face the truth she'd been hiding from me. That evening, I waited until we were alone, just the two of us. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her I knew. I told her I'd seen the messages, knew exactly where she'd been and with whom. She didn't even deny it. She just went pale like a ghost and then got angry, tried to turn it around on me, asking if I'd been spying on her, as if I was the one in the wrong. She tried to defend herself, said it wasn't what it looked like, that Dante and I are just close colleagues, like I hadn't seen the proof with my own eyes. I told her to drop the act, that I knew everything. And for the first time, she looked defeated. Her face crumpled, and she just stood there, speechless. I didn't let her off easy. I told her how she'd broken my trust, torn apart everything we'd built together. I let it all out, every piece of anger, every ounce of hurt. She tried to apologize, but it was hollow, meaningless. I didn't want her apologies. I wanted the woman I'd married, the life we'd promised each other. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, a stranger who'd ripped my heart out and didn't even seem sorry for it. She went to bed that night, leaving me standing alone in the living room, staring at the broken pieces of the life we'd shared. And that's when it hit me. I was alone. She wasn't my wife anymore, not in any way that mattered. And I knew in that moment that there was no going back. She'd made her choice, and now I had to make mine. When you hit rock bottom, you find yourself thinking things you'd never imagine, doing things that seem unthinkable. After that last confrontation with Cassandra, I was done. I couldn't let her off the hook. Not after everything she'd put me through, the lies, the sneaking around, treating me like a fool in my own home. But I wasn't just going to wallow in my anger. No, I had a plan that would hit her where it hurt. I called Sandra, her mother. I didn't know what I'd say exactly, but I knew I wanted her to see the wreckage Cassandra had left behind. She picked up on the first ring, and I invited her over, saying I could use some company. I could use someone to talk to. Sandra is someone who knows what Cassandra and I had. I didn't have to say more. She agreed to come over that evening, no questions asked. When Sandra showed up, she looked like she'd been through hell herself. I guess she'd been seeing the changes in Cassandra too, the distance between us. She hugged me, and I felt this strange comfort, like maybe she was the last person left who understood what Cassandra and I used to have. We sat down, poured a couple of glasses of wine, and started talking. I hadn't felt so open, so free to say what I really felt in months. She listened, nodding, sometimes shaking her head in disbelief, but always with this sympathy that Cassandra had stopped showing me a long time ago. We reminisced about the good old days, times when Cassandra and I were genuinely happy, before Dante, before all the lies. And as we talked, I felt this pull towards Sandra. She was warm, caring, someone who was genuinely there for me, which was more than I could say about Cassandra. The wine loosened us both up, and somewhere along the way, our casual conversation turned into something deeper. Sandra sighed, leaning back, her eyes glistening. "Gree, you didn't deserve this. You've been nothing but good to her. I honestly don't know where I went wrong as her mother." She looked down, clearly hurt, clearly as betrayed as I felt. Before I knew it, I reached out, took her hand, and she looked at me with a softness that almost broke me. We held each other's gaze, and I could feel something unspoken pass between us. I pulled her close, and for a moment, we just stayed like that, two people who'd been hurt by the same betrayal. But then something shifted. Her hand was on my shoulder, mine on her back, and before I could think, before I could stop myself, our lips met. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. We let go. All the anger, the hurt, the loneliness, it all seemed to vanish in that moment, replaced by something fierce, something I hadn't felt in so long. We lost ourselves completely, forgetting everything else. It was just me and Sandra, wrapped up in this strange, forbidden closeness. I won't lie, it felt good, in ways I can't even begin to explain. She was there, fully present, giving me something Cassandra had stolen from me long ago. And in that moment, I didn't care about the consequences. The pain, the betrayal, all of it faded, replaced by this raw, undeniable connection. The next morning, I woke up with this mixture of guilt and satisfaction. What I'd done was wrong, but it felt justified. I felt alive, something Cassandra hadn't made me feel in years. I knew what this would do to her if she found out. Knew it would break her the way she'd broken me. And that was exactly what I wanted. So, I decided to tell her. I wanted her to feel the same pain, the same shock that had ripped through me when I found out about her affair. I waited until she got home that evening, and then, with as much calm as I could muster, I told her everything. I didn't hold back. I told her about the night I'd spent with her mother, every detail, every kiss, every touch. I watched her face go pale, her mouth open in shock. "How could you?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "With my mother? Are you insane?" I shrugged, letting the bitterness seep through. "How could you, Cassandra? With Dante? After everything we had?" I wasn't going to let her play the victim. She'd brought this on herself, and now she was finally seeing the cost of her betrayal. She started yelling, blaming me for everything, saying I was sick and pathetic. I just stood there, calm, watching her unravel. I told her flat out that she had destroyed us long before I did anything with Sandra. "You think I wanted to go there?" I said. "You think I wanted to hurt you?" "No, Cassandra. But you hurt me first, over and over again, and now I'm just returning the favor." Her face was flushed, her eyes blazing with anger and disbelief. She kept yelling, demanding answers, wanting to know how I could betray her like that. I looked her dead in the eyes and told her, "This is what happens when you push someone too far, Cassandra. This is the price of your lies, your betrayal. You lost me the moment you chose him over us." She was speechless, staring at me like she didn't even recognize the man in front of her. And maybe she didn't. Maybe I didn't either. But I felt free, finally unburdened by the weight of pretending, of keeping it all bottled up inside. In the end, I told her that our marriage was over, that there was no coming back from this. She tried to argue, to insist that we could work it out, but I didn't want to hear it. "There's nothing left to save, Cassandra," I said, turning away. She stood there, frozen, as I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the truth of what she'd done. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I was done with her lies, her betrayal. The revenge might not have fixed everything, but it gave me closure, gave me the strength to walk away. And as I left her standing there, I knew that whatever came next, it was my chance to start over, to rebuild a life without the weight of her betrayal holding me down. The divorce process wasn't something I looked forward to, but it was necessary. After the explosive fallout from my night with Sandra and my confrontation with Cassandra, I knew there was no going back. Whatever love or trust we'd had was gone, buried under layers of betrayal and anger. I walked into my lawyer's office with a strange mix of relief and regret. The relief came from knowing I was taking control, finally cutting myself free. But there was sadness, too, for what we'd lost, everything we'd built, the memories we'd made. As flawed as it was, it had still been real once. Sitting down with my lawyer, I realized just how complicated things would get. This wasn't just signing a few papers. We had assets, a home, and the remnants of a life that had to be divided. He ran me through the process, outlining what to expect, the documents we'd need, and of course, the inevitable court sessions. I tried to brace myself, but I knew it was going to be a brutal experience. And sure enough, our first court meeting was a disaster. As soon as the judge started discussing assets, Cassandra's demeanor shifted. She seemed calm at first, almost cordial, but the moment the focus turned to finances and property, her claws came out. She wanted the house, most of our savings, and whatever else she could get her hands on. It didn't take long before we were throwing accusations across the table. She was hell-bent on painting me as the villain, saying I was the one who destroyed our marriage. She conveniently forgot all about Dante and the affair that had started it all. "You're the one who couldn't keep things together, Gris," she spat during one of our meetings, her voice laced with bitterness. "You're the one who made this a mess." I laughed, unable to hold back. "Are you seriously blaming me? After everything you did? You threw us away for Dante, Cassandra. You lied to me, betrayed me, and now you want to act like you're the victim?" But she wouldn't hear it. To her, everything was my fault. It was easier that way, I guess, to make me the scapegoat. Our arguments turned into these emotional storms, dragging out every single issue we'd ever had. It was exhausting, infuriating. There were moments I wanted to throw in the towel, just to be done with it, but then I'd remember why I was doing this. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything after everything she'd put me through. Through all this, Oscar and a few of my close friends became my lifeline. They knew what I was going through, and they did what they could to pull me out of the storm, even if only for a little while. Oscar organized weekend trips, short escapes where we'd hit the mountains or just get away from it all. Those weekends were like therapy sessions. Hours of me venting, them listening, offering advice, or just reminding me I wasn't alone. One night, over a few beers around the campfire, I finally opened up about my fears, the doubts that kept me up at night. What if I'm just broken after this? I admitted, staring into the flames. What if I can't trust anyone again? Oscar placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice steady. "You're not broken, Gris. Hurt, yeah, but not broken. You'll get through this." His words helped more than he probably realized. But as supportive as my friends were, every court session still drained me. Each victory, like securing joint property rights or keeping some of the savings, came at a cost. Cassandra fought me every step of the way, her anger growing with each decision that didn't go in her favor. There was no middle ground, no compromise. It was all-out war. I started seeing a psychologist just to help me process everything. I needed to work through the anger, the frustration, and the hurt that kept resurfacing. Therapy became a safe space where I could unpack my emotions without judgment, where I could admit that I was scared of what lay ahead. The sessions were rough, peeling back the layers of betrayal and disappointment, but they were also cathartic. I talked about the future, about the things I wanted but felt hesitant to reach for. The psychologist encouraged me to take things one step at a time, to focus on rebuilding myself rather than worrying about what might or might not happen down the road. After what felt like endless court dates and painful discussions, we finally reached the end. Cassandra and I sat across from each other in the lawyer's office, the final divorce papers spread out in front of us. She looked worn, tired, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the woman I'd once loved. But that was all in the past. Whatever we'd had was gone, and I wasn't going to let nostalgia cloud my resolve. The lawyer asked for our signatures, and I took a deep breath, putting pen to paper, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders with each stroke. Cassandra signed as well, her face a mask of indifference. She didn't look at me as she handed the papers back to the lawyer, didn't say a word as she gathered her things. I stood up, feeling like I just finished a marathon, both physically and emotionally drained, but also free. Finally free. As I walked out of the office, I felt the cool air hit my face, and I took the deepest breath I'd taken in months. The burden, the anger, the bitterness, it all seemed to melt away, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't felt in ages. This was it. This was my new beginning. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. It was an open road, and I was ready to face whatever came next. After the dust of the divorce settled, I found myself at a strange crossroads. The life I'd known was gone, and for the first time, I had no one but myself to think about. It was a little terrifying, but I knew I couldn't sit around and let the bitterness of what happened with Cassandra define me. I had a second chance, a clean slate, and I wasn't going to waste it. I decided it was time to invest in myself. I'd put so much of my energy into our relationship, into trying to make something work that was already broken. Now it was my turn. I signed up for a few career development courses, started attending seminars, and even threw myself into a couple of workshops. I didn't know exactly where I wanted to go, but I figured the more skills I gained, the more doors would open. It felt good to have something to focus on, something that wasn't tied to the past. A few months into this new chapter, I found an opportunity with a new company. It was a fresh start in every sense, surrounded by people who had no idea what I'd been through. It felt liberating. That's where I met Isabella. She joined a few weeks after I started, and we ended up working on a project together. I remember our first conversation. She had this quiet strength about her, this unspoken resilience that I recognized immediately. As we got to know each other, we realized we had more in common than we'd expected. She'd been through her own struggles, her own heartbreaks. She shared her dreams, her fears, the things she'd lost along the way. And for the first time since Cassandra, I felt something genuine, a connection, an openness that wasn't clouded by lies or hidden agendas. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something deeper, built slowly, through conversations and shared experiences. Isabella and I started spending time together outside of work. We'd go out for dinner, have long conversations over wine, and I found myself looking forward to each time we'd meet. On weekends, we'd take little trips, explore places we hadn't been before. We even started attending business events together, bouncing ideas off each other, supporting each other's goals. She wasn't just a distraction or a rebound. She was someone who understood me in a way that felt real. As my relationship with Isabella blossomed, I knew I still had work to do on myself. I was still seeing my psychologist, working through the remnants of my anger, my doubts, and my fears. Therapy wasn't easy. There were days when I'd leave feeling drained, like I'd ripped open old wounds. But slowly, I started feeling lighter, stronger. I began engaging in sports again, taking up running, and even joining a local gym. Physical activity became my outlet, a way to channel my emotions and stay grounded. The relationships I neglected during my marriage, I started to rebuild. I reached out to old friends, reconnected with family, and realized just how much support I had. I hadn't been alone. Not really. I'd just been too wrapped up in my own pain to see it. The people around me had been there all along, and they welcomed me back with open arms. There were still moments when memories of Cassandra and everything that happened would sneak up on me. Sometimes, I'd feel the sting of betrayal, the anger bubbling up again. But each time, it felt a little less intense. I reminded myself that she was just a chapter in my life, a chapter that was over. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how much power I gave it over my future. One evening, Isabella and I were sitting on a hill, watching the sunset after a long day. We'd gone hiking, just the two of us, far from any distractions. As I looked out over the horizon, feeling the warmth of the fading sun on my face, it hit me how far I'd come. The life I'd left behind, the pain and heartache, it was all part of the journey, part of what had brought me here. I turned to Isabella, and she smiled, like she knew exactly what I was thinking. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence was enough. I'd found something real, something built on trust, respect, and understanding. And in that moment, I promised myself that I'd never let anyone or anything ruin my happiness again. I was done looking back. My life was in front of me now, waiting for me to live it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a warm, golden glow, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. It was my new beginning, my chance to start over with a clean slate. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let myself fully embrace the future, knowing that whatever lay ahead, I was ready.